I'll call this meeting to order. This is the regular school board meeting of the Northfield Public Schools. It is Monday, April 14th, 7 p.m. Dr. Richardson, we had a couple items in our table file.
Yes, if you'll take a look at the table file memorandum, we do have an additional item for individual action, and that'll be the approval of the Catholic Facilities Bond bid. We've got some really great news in terms of the number of bids and the low interest rate, which is going to allow us to do some additional things with the capital projects in terms of roofing and tuck pointing. And so we'll be pleased to have that presented. And Heather from PFM is here to walk us through the money part, and Matt is here to talk us through how that's going to impact us in terms of availability of resources. We also then have on the consent, we have a revised recommendation for capital roofing bids for Greenville Park, Northfield High School, and tuck pointing. And again, this reflects the fact that we are in a position where we have additional dollars now, so we'll be able to do the last one of the high school projects that we did not previously believe we'd be able to do at a cost that will again be very positive for us at this point. We also have information on some additional grant requests to Smith and CEMAC, and some additional personnel items in terms of increase, decrease, and change in assignments, leaves of absence, and resignations. And we also have an enrollment report, and please note on the enrollment report, we had a snag in terms of having a grade be left out on the previous sheet you had. If you notice that suddenly the middle school enrollment went from 921 down to about 600 and some, you might have thought, gee, what happened? But it's just that one of the grades dropped off the list, so it's now back on, and the middle school is back up to 921. So life is good. So I think that's everything we have in terms of additional information.
All right. If there's no objection, we will add these to the agenda as we move forward. All right. We are ready for public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the community to address the board. Is there anyone here who wishes to address the board? We will move on to approval of the minutes. Board members, you have in your packet the minutes from the last school board meetings, which were held on March 10th, quite a long time ago. Is there a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Moved by Julie, seconded by Carrie. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Announcements and recognition.
Okay, several this evening, and first of all, we'd like to introduce our new Northfield News reporter, Molly Larson. And Molly, have you had a chance to have time with the Faribault board yet?
I have.
Okay. Okay, very good. So we're breaking her in, and I did have an opportunity to meet with Molly last week and talk a little bit about kind of the upcoming activities that we'll be looking at. And I know she already had a story in about us in terms of looking at the Safe Schools bill, or the anti-bullying bill. So welcome. The second thing is, for the 20th year, our Northfield German students participated in the National German Exam Competition. Competing this year were 35 students in levels 2, 3, 4, and 5. Again, this year, many of our Northfield students placed very well. Congratulations to the following students who achieved the Bronze Award by scoring at or above the 70th percentile nationwide. Those individuals included Nick Bradling and Danica Simonet. Students receiving the Silver Award by scoring at the 80th percentile or above nationwide included Christoph Zweifel, Evan Pack, Noah Klein, Allison Langston, Dimitri Beebe, and Martha Barth. And the Gold Award is given for placing above the 90th percentile and advances students to the prize level competition. This involves writing a short essay in German and an oral interview also conducted in German. Gold Award students this year are Andrea Thurnier.
Andrea Turner.
Let me try it one more time. Andrea, help me, please. Andrea Turnhair. Thank you. And I apologize, Andrea, in advance of you hearing this. Curtis Bobert, Cecilia Krista.
That's correct.
Okay, and Elizabeth Cloverty. The interviews were conducted on Saturday, March the 8th at the University of St. Thomas. Congratulations to all of the students who participated for a job well done. Also, our Northfield High School mock trial team, coached by Stephen Cade, and the Knowledge Bowl team, coached by Troy Coors, both qualified and participated at their state tournaments this year. Also, Northfield High School had 5 speech students qualify and participate at the state speech meet. And the speech team is coached by Jody Saxton-West. Several of our Northfield students took home top awards in the spring chess tournament on March 22nd, sponsored by South Central Service Cooperative, Mankato Community Education Recreation. Peter Hillman and Colin Thomas Green, both students at Sibley, finished first and tied for second, respectively, in the middle division. Peter placed first and Colin placed second, and Saxon Eggy, also a student at Sibley, finished tied for fourth place in the grade 4 level. In the upper division, Henry Hutton of St. Dominic's finished in first place. Northfield High School student Jasper Eggy and Gus Onsorg. Onsorg, thank you. Both finished tied for second place. Jackson Hillman, a 9th grader, finished tied for third. Jackson was tied for first in grade 9, and Jasper and Gus tied for first place in grade 10. Again, congratulations to all these students in their chess endeavors. Also, our middle school bookstore, the Tattered Pages, will be hosting its 5th annual Mother's Day sale during the week of May the 5th. This sale, students purchase Mother's Day gifts using Tattered Pages coupons that they've earned throughout the year. Tattered Pages will be selling books and gift items suitable for the important women in middle school students' lives. Items needed include books, novels, cookbooks, inspirational, craft, poetry, etc., unused candles, picture frames, wall hangings, stationery, journals, note cards, jewelry, baskets, jewelry boxes, music boxes, vases, handbags, unused bath products, and unused perfume. So if you have any of those items you can donate, please drop them off at the middle school or contact Amy C. for pickup. Also, congratulations to Beth Berry, former director of the Torch program. She's being awarded a Best Prep Teacher of Excellence Award this year. Best Prep is one of the state's leaders in connecting business professionals with students, and Beth will be honored at Best Prep's annual luncheon, which will be held on May the 22nd. Also would report, last time we talked about the fact that we had Representative John Klein visit us and work with us on special ed. I got a note back from Brenda Kragseth, who is on our district's special ed advisory committee. She and her son Cal were in Washington, D.C., and were able to meet with John Klein in his office and have an opportunity to talk to him again about special education funding and also paperwork reduction. So really appreciate her efforts and Cal's efforts in continuing to share important information about funding for special education and trying to address paperwork reduction needs. And then, Rob, I think you have an announcement on the sidewalk poetry contest.
Yes. So this year, 6th grade teacher Rhea Merkins from the middle school and one of her students, Bella Smith, were both winners of the 2014 sidewalk poetry competition sponsored by the Northfield Arts and Culture Commission and the Friends of and Foundation of the Northfield Public Library. Their poems were among 10 poems chosen from 89 poems submitted to the contest this year. Rhea and Bella joined the other 2014 Sidewalk Poetry Contest winners in the KYMN studios for Paula Granquist's Art Zany show last Friday. Bella said that her poem was written for Ms. Merkin's writing class at the middle school, so good poetry being written in the middle school. This was a particularly good year for the Northfield Public Schools in the Sidewalk Poetry Contest because in addition to Bella and Rhea, the winners included 2 retired teachers from the district, Dana Engstrom and Chris Ellison. And also last year, Ms. Merkins worked with the Arts and Culture Commission to plan for the Poem in Your Pocket Day when boxes of poems to share were made available at local businesses. And this year, the same thing's going to be done. And it will be taking place on Thursday, April 24th. So, poetry is alive and well.
And on sidewalks coming soon.
On sidewalks. Yeah, they'll be installed over the summer, and then in August there'll probably be a walk around or a reading where all of the poets get together downtown and read their poems.
Poetry, not in the abstract, but in the concrete.
Yes.
Yes, very, very concrete.
All done.
Boom.
Group shot.
Annie, do you have another one?
I have just a recognition. Last week on Thursday evening was the Evening of the Arts at Greenville Park, and it was decorated up and looked great. We had all kinds of activities going on, and we do that every year. It's great.
Very good. Julie?
Yeah, busy time of year. I have a couple things. I just wanted to thank the Northfield Arts Guild and our art staff throughout the district for their sponsoring the all-school art show, which was really well done, and we're so fortunate to have such a fabulous venue. It was just beautifully done, and it showcased kids' art from all over the district, and it was just really well done, and it extended over a course of a couple weeks, and then they had the open house piece on Saturday, so it was really well done. And then for those of you who were able to see the wonderful performance of Hairspray at the middle school, you know when I say it was incredibly wonderful, that really it was an amazing performance by our Northfield Middle School students. So, good things.
Great. Any other announcements or recognition? All right. Very good. We are ready then to move on for our first item for discussion or report, which is the teacher evaluation update first. And Mr. Hillman will be presenting. And board members, you should have had in your packet some PowerPoint.
Went to sleep here, so I'm gonna force it as I tested it a number of times here. We're trying something different, so thank you for your understanding. What you have in your packet tonight is a presentation that has some information about the teacher evaluation process that we've been going through for almost a year now. You'll recall it was nearly a year ago that Mark Thornton and I stood before you here talking about the beginning of the process. And so tonight I'm going to go ahead and talk through it with you here as well. All right, so why are we talking about teacher evaluation? Thanks for that very awkward segue here, but appreciate it. We talked about teacher evaluation over the last year because the state legislature, they voted to implement a new teacher and principal evaluation system. It was a couple years ago now, in the 2011 session. They actually voted to do that, so it wasn't something that we were choosing to do. It was by law. We were required, but as many of you know, we've had a very formal teacher evaluation process in the district for more than a decade. One of the reasons that we have the legislation is, unfortunately, there are many schools throughout the state that do not have a formal approach to teacher evaluation, and some districts where teachers could go a decade or more, or maybe even their whole career, without having had an evaluation past their probationary stage. So this was an effort of the legislature to make sure that teacher growth and development was a focal point for school districts. And we're not just by ourselves. Over the last 5 years, 32 states have updated their teacher evaluation laws to require more frequent and more detailed teacher observation and evaluation programs. And again, that's throughout the nation. For those of you who are looking for a little Friday night reading, the requirements are outlined in Statute 122.840, Subdivision 8, for some of you who want to fact check here in terms of that. So you'll remember that last year the district was participated in one of 17 school districts in the state that piloted the principal evaluation system, and the process is live this year. So our principals have all been through that evaluation process once. We're well through it. In fact, just this afternoon, the annual stakeholder feedback survey went out to teaching staff in their buildings. And over the next couple of weeks, parents will begin to get their annual survey as well that looks at it's the survey that we're using for both principal evaluation as well as our new World's Best Workforce report. that was the principal evaluation piece that we've done over the last year, and we had some very good feedback on that process. So our teacher evaluation planning team, we had 16 participants, we had 11 teachers, 2 principals, and 3 district administrators who were part of this group. We met more than a dozen times over 11 months. We met heavily in April and early May of last year, then took a little bit of a break, met during July, and then came back in late October, November, in that time frame to try to finish our work. And what we did is we came up with a consensus among the group on the core of the plan. So the first piece is the consensus was not to use the state plan. And this is where when I was doing these presentations at the buildings, if you were to print the state plan, it's 133 pages, and that is just the model implementation piece. That doesn't include the 24-page piece around the teacher standards and another 30-some page document that has to do with setting learning targets or growth goals. And so what we decided was that, remember that the legislation says that a district and its local teachers association must, not may, must come to a joint agreement or you're required to use the state plan. And as we looked at the state plan, we think that it's a very ambitious plan. It's probably a better than best practice plan. There's a lot of quality stuff in the state plan. However, it is not, we don't believe that it is implementable. We don't think you can really implement it without significant increase in observers and other individuals, and as you all know, they have given us a boatload of money to implement this. Actually, that was some sarcasm. We've had zero. We actually had heard early in the legislative session that there might be some shift in giving districts that were not QComp districts some money for similar kinds of activities, but it has not come to fruition as of yet. So again, the department, I think, did their best job that they could, because remember, their job is to put all the musts and the mays in the plan. So the statute says districts must do this, districts may do this. So there's a portion that people have to do, and then there's a portion that people can choose to do. And the department, of course, has to write a plan that includes both. So our consensus overall, while we admire the work that the folks did there, actually those 2 gentlemen, Greg Keith and Tyler Livingston, have really done yeoman's work in trying to put together a quality plan. Most districts in the state are not choosing to use it. They're trying to develop their own. For our probationary staff, they've been governed by 122A.40 for a long time. And so their probationary status and the way that we work through them, through their evaluation process, will be very similar to what it had been in the past. They will have 3 formal observation reports during their probationary period, which, you know, if you're a first-time teacher, it's the first 3 consecutive years of employment in the same Minnesota school system. If they had received tenure in another district and have come here, it's just that first year that they're here that they're probationary year. So even if someone has been a teacher for 15 years and they receive tenure in another district, they come here, they're probationary for 1 year until they have that second contract. And so probationary staff will remain largely similar in the structure. We really focused on building a plan around development and growth. We wanted to make sure that our teachers had a great opportunity to continue their development and to grow as an educator. It's built around reflection. We believe in the power of reflection. It's evidenced in our PLCs. It's evidenced throughout the district. We're a growth mindset district, I think. I think our people are looking at themselves and how can we become better. And one of the ways that we know we can get to that goal is through reflection. The local plan, this is a must from the state, that the state requires that the summative evaluation by a trained evaluator happen every 3 years. So we had an approach that was a 5-year plan. You were evaluated once every 5 years. The new legislation requires that a summative evaluation is done every 3 years. There are some activities in those other off years that they'll be conducting as well. So our local plan components include 50% of the overall evaluation from the observer or the principal's evaluation, your standard supervisor's evaluation. And you're going to notice that our percentages in our teacher plan match what we had in our principal evaluation plan. What we've chosen to do is we've chosen to recommend using the Kim Marshall standards. For many years we've used these standards developed the framework for effective teaching by Charlotte Danielson, very popular. What we liked a lot about the Kim Marshall standards is that they're much more discrete. So even though there are more than domains, there are 6 domains as opposed to 4, when you read the actual descriptors, we think that a teacher in a classroom can read that and say, oh, that makes sense to me. I can see myself doing that. And so the committee met, we looked at we looked at the ones by Dr. Marzano, we looked at the state example, we looked at the updated Charlotte Danielson stuff. and we landed on the Marshall standards. As a former history major, I have to just, I keep wanting to call it the Marshall Plan, and that's the historian. The one thing that we really like about Kim Marshall's approach is that he advocates for more shorter classroom visits. So rather than the once every 3 years, I come into the classroom, a full-length period observation, what he recommends is several data points throughout each year. And so rather than just that one-time visit, there's more frequent visits, and what we think is that becomes more authentic and provides better feedback to the instructor. The summative plan will include comprehensive feedback, but something that we're really excited about is that we have put in what we call focus elements. So a tenured teacher who's up in the summative component, the summative of the third year, what's going to happen is they are going to hone in on 2 elements within the 6 domains, and the building principal is going to get to pick one. And while they'll be evaluated in a very comprehensive fashion, these are 3 standards or 3 elements within the standard that there's going to be laser-focused feedback on. So it could be that a teacher is interested in improving a particular area. They may pick a couple of those standards that are related to that particular area, and they're going to say, I really want, when you come through, this is the kind of feedback I'm looking for. We really like this, and our staff really like it because it provides choice for our staff, and they get to have the ownership in terms of providing or getting what feedback they think is important for their professional practice. So we really like this piece that they're going to be evaluated in a comprehensive fashion, but they're going to pick some what we call focus elements or power elements, and they're going to get some very detailed feedback on those areas. That's the kind of thing the building principal might be looking for every time that they're in their classroom. Maybe they're looking at, I need to have transitions that are a little bit better, or those kinds of pieces. The principal's going to focus on those transitions and give feedback. Have you thought about this? Let's try this. We believe that that kind of feedback is going to lead to some really good growth. 35% of the overall evaluation is related to student achievement. This is the only part that is in law. And if you remember, originally it talked about value-added measurement. And if you have followed any of the concerns that have been happening across the country and other states that have required value-added measurement as part of their teacher evaluation law, there's a little bit of an uproar about that in certain places. So we're thankful that the legislature went back and took that part out. So we are not about piling more things on people's plates, and we are about saying, what are we doing well and how can we leverage that? This committee went to a place that was very comfortable, yet also challenging to us, in the fact that what are student academic goals that we have that are good for all time zones. So a person can have an academic goal in mathematics or reading, because when we go based upon standardized tests, we only have so many standardized tests. And so the industrial technology teacher is treated differently than the 3rd grade reading teacher, who is treated differently than the kindergarten teacher. So we have a culture of PLCs in our district, and what we determined is that we would recommend that we use our PLC goals for the student achievement component. So we have a form that teachers are going to keep track of the goals over the 3-year period. At the end of each year, they're going to reflect upon, did they make their goal as a team or did they not? What conditions contributed to making the goal? What conditions maybe contributed when we asked them to set stretch goals? What were the things that didn't? What are the things that maybe prevented us from getting to us to where we wanted to go? And again, what we think is so important about reflection, that the actual evaluative part will be developed based upon a rubric. I'm going to North Carolina.
Yes.
I thought when you put airplay on this, the accent's going to stop. There you go.
But just goes to show you, Chris.
That's exactly right. Now I'm nervous if anybody else texts you. So anyway, now I got to go back. We can recover. So the PLC goals are really important. We're going to be tracking those, and then we actually spent a lot of time developing our own rubric for judging reflection. This is one of the hardest professional endeavors I've ever been a part of, and we actually just put it up on the screen and we hammered out each word and really talked about what is important when it comes to reflection. Because what we think is if we get people who are reflective practitioners and we reflect upon our PLC goals, and we look for that on a regular basis, that is a win-win for everybody. It also puts a lot of emphasis and makes those PLC goals even more accountable in terms of when my evaluation is based upon, 35% is based upon my reflection on those over several years. We think that that's very powerful. And anyone who we've talked to, our teaching staff really seem to enjoy this particular part. The final part that is a little bit more challenging is the 15% student engagement. There are a number of districts throughout the state who are piloting the state plan this year, yet no one can pilot the entire state plan. It's too big. And what we've heard, I heard a roundtable of people at the MASPA conference recently who are piloting different parts of student engagement are saying it's very challenging. So we have developed an observer checklist that is a piece that we're going to try to integrate into that summative assessment. And then we are also in this spring going to be piloting student engagement surveys, one from a group called Tripod. There's some other people we're bringing into the mix now as well. Tripod is a survey that was developed with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It has a huge N in terms of a ton of students across the nation have taken this. There is an emerging body of research that links student feedback on their teacher to their achievement. It's incredible. If you think about it, we've asked lots of people about how their teachers are doing, except the kids. And what this emerging body of research is showing is that the kids are the ones who know it best of all. And so that's a pretty exciting thing that we're going to pilot some of those. The University of Minnesota, my understanding, is developing one that the state is going to provide to school districts for free. We're looking into that one as well. But this is a little nerve-wracking in terms of when a student survey may be part of my evaluation. And so again, one of the things that we've done in this case is it will not be the raw data that you are judged upon, but rather your reflection upon that data. And again, I was taken by surprise by the number of students who said this. And now that I've read that, I understand that, and here's how I'm going to change my practice to try to address those concerns. What we think is it will make our staff more aware of what's going on, and we know that this is going to be one of the areas we'll need to provide the most amount of professional development. So again, our professional learning communities actually count for part of the law, which is the peer review component in the off years. But we also have a culture of coaching in our district with more than 20 people trained in cognitive coaching techniques. And we're going to continue to work on providing those opportunities for instructional coaching and peer review as needed. A piece that I just need to make sure that people are aware of is that the law does require that we provide an improvement plan for those people who are not meeting professional standards. And for the first time, to my knowledge, in Minnesota history, the legislature has put in law that we must discipline people who do not make standards after having an opportunity for improvement. And so they're saying, of course, in their infinite wisdom, they do not define what discipline is. But at the same time, this was a piece that Northfield has had a performance improvement plan model in existence for a decade. And it has been used a handful of times. And in each of those times, we work very closely with the association to make sure that due process is protected and that improvement is the goal. And we have had some success in those improvement plan methods. So this is something that the committee did not feel we needed to go back and rewrite the wheel. We had a plan that worked. We just have to substitute the new standards for it. The bottom line is that the law requires the association and the district come to what's called joint agreement. And I'm happy to report that the Northfield Education Association recently voted to enter into the joint agreement, which we're very excited about. We think that really shows the collaborative nature that we have with the association. And if we didn't come to that joint agreement, we must use the state plan. And what we've determined, again, while it's got a lot of positives, we don't think it's doable. And we don't think it's focused on reflection and growth as our plan has been. So again, what we've got is we've got a plan that has been put together that we've just highlighted for you tonight that's been developed in a collaborative manner. And we're focusing on providing those feedback loops for people that support our folks being reflective practitioners. And that's the goal. If we can get people who are reflective and thinking about their teaching practice and how they can improve it, we believe that we are well on the road to success. We'll begin training with principals and staff. In fact, our principals are doing some pilot observations using the new standards this spring. And so that will jumpstart in terms of what kind of professional development we need to provide to them over the summer. And then next year will be our first implementation year. So, when I went into teaching nearly 20 years ago, I determined that I was choosing a vocation, not just a job. And I really believe that. And one of the things that I enjoy about education is there's no visible finish line. 20 years later, you'd think I would have figured it out, and I think I'm just starting to figure it out. And that's what's exciting about this, because it is always changing, and there's always something we can do better or more of or in a different way to make a difference for kids. And we think we just need to be really intentional about our growth as professionals. Our PLCs are one of those core components, and I think you'll see that our evaluation model is really wrapped around that as well. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know that was relatively quick, but I certainly would be happy to answer any questions you might have about the proposal at this time, or about what the plan that we're putting together.
Board members, questions? Julie?
I have a couple of questions, but it was interesting because I really had to sort of get my head around this whole concept or whatever. So I did go on the Department of Ed website, and there was something that was really interesting to me, and it was a group that had taken the 18 districts that were pilot districts, and it was only after 3 months of them piloting the evaluation, and they gave a summary of where the strengths were and the things that they had learned. And I think one of the biggest strengths I see based on what I read is that we are working, we're tying it into other district initiatives, and that's where teachers really felt good about. So we're embedding it with our PLCs, and it's aligning very well with other district initiatives and goals and building goals. And the biggest thing is the continuous improvement. And it's really interesting because I think that's just such a part of our culture that we don't realize in other districts it's not. And then, and where districts are able to do that and tie that in with the evaluations, the teachers are feeling really comfortable about that. And so I'm hoping that that comfort level is there for our teachers, up front, because it does align so well with things we're already doing within the district, like the PLCs. So my question about the PLC was, if there's that peer review component part of the PLC, what will teachers do, like particularly at the high school where they're a solo PLC? Will that be a disadvantage for them?
Well, I think the important thing to remember is almost all of the people who might be in a PLC of one for part of the month are usually always involved in some other kind of PLC. So we have a handful of people who might take 1 week of the month to focus on a particular subject that they teach alone. But in almost every case, those people are involved with another group of people at other points in the month. So for example, we may have an AP Science situation where the person is focused on that one course, but during the rest of the month they are with other science teachers. So in terms of that peer review and that collaboration component, we think that that will certainly solve that issue. Though at the same time, one of the things that we know for sure is that as we go down the road with this, there will be things that we get through and we say this needs to be tweaked or this needs to be changed. One of the things that we're really hoping is that our plan that we have right now has been around for a decade, and that's been great. But we need this to become more of a living document and something that is reviewed and updated on a more frequent basis. And that's one of the things that we will be doing on an annual basis, is working through our committee to say, how did it go this year? Are there any changes that we think that need to be made? Those kinds of pieces. So the singleton individuals, my sense is most of those folks are plugged into another group already. And so for that peer review component, I think they will certainly be supported in a collaborative environment.
Okay. Then the other question I had was, have we had the opportunity to identify where the costs might be? I know it's going to require obviously some financial resources against this. Do we have any idea what that might be?
Well, we actually do, and we were actually early in the legislative process. We were called by folks from the Capitol to put together some estimates. And we did some estimates that hovered around about $60,000 for the first year. And a lot of that included time, not necessarily money spent on other pieces. But if you think about just the training of building principals, training of other individuals who are involved in the process, those are the kinds of things that we saw as the big dollar investments. And the other piece is that we're very fortunate to have had, because the big expense, I think, comes in the peer coaches. If you're a district that doesn't have the job embedded professional development like we do, a lot of districts are going to have to go out and hire people to provide those off-year peer coaching. And they're going to need to spend some of their FTE on that in order to be able to make that happen. And so some of those personnel costs are going to be significant. In other districts, this is one of those areas that it's counterintuitive to how I behave most of the time. Lots of districts are jumping on the bandwagon by buying relatively sophisticated online database systems to do these kinds of evaluations. And I have long held a belief that is what I call the McDonaldization of evaluation and does not provide authentic feedback, in my humble but deadly accurate opinion. And so we are going to be using some good old-fashioned regular kind of word forms to begin with, because we really want that evaluation piece to be a conversation. Some of the online systems that you're seeing provide immediate feedback, but it's immediate feedback in written form, and we're just concerned that that will interrupt the conversation piece that we think is so important, becoming reflective. Those are some of the things where the costs are going to come into play.
Okay, thank you.
Ours will mostly be in time, Julie.
Okay.
Rob?
I just wanted to ask about the pieces of this. There's observation of classrooms and PLC reflection, and there's a student engagement survey.
Correct.
This is something we talked about before. What about the parts of a teacher's job which are not necessarily observable in the classroom? For example, accessibility to students for extra help after class, and I see that there's no parent, there's a student engagement survey, but there's no parent feedback. So parents who are trying to email the teacher saying, what can you do for my student, or my student's having trouble, and if, some way of evaluating how they communicate with both parents and with students after class, and like maybe part of it being evaluation of the interaction in parent-teacher conferences or something.
There actually is part of the observer's evaluation, so part of the Marshall domain is a component on professional responsibilities, and there are several segments of that rubric, Rob, that ask the observer to provide feedback to the teacher on exactly what you just said. And what I'll do is I'll make sure that you get a copy of the rubric so that you can see it. It's very detailed, and it goes into a number of different pieces about that parent connection, which we think is really important. And then as we looked at we have a parent survey for the building that will go along with the building principals. And so as we looked at the number of surveys that this potentially could create, for parents in terms of having to fill one out for each of my child's students, and the methods of trying to manage that, we believe that that's a challenge, and our hope is that we will get some of that feedback through the building level survey, and in addition, encouraging people, if they do have issues with the classroom teacher, of course, we always believe in the chain of command, go to the teacher first, and if I don't have success in that, certainly go to the building principal. And in a lot of cases, in some cases, I think it's something that the building principal is very aware of. There's a communication issue. And I think that we'll also see that come out in the student engagement piece as well. And so as we pilot some of that, those are the pieces that we're going to look at to see, does the student engagement give us enough feedback on that component?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Other questions? Carrie?
Well, you beat me to it. I was going to ask if you could send us the Marshall rubric. Could you also share with us the rubric that the committee developed on reflection?
We'd be happy to, or we might want to sell it at some point.
Yeah.
It's exciting. We've been trying to do it for a while, and we're not sure if it's perfect, but what we think is that it's got an opportunity to help people and we have a series of reflection questions that we've developed for people to be able to go through that. And so reflection is a very hard thing to measure, and it's really about the word that we debated a lot was depth, because what we're looking for are deep reflections. And so we're curious. We think we've got a good one, but we'll be happy to get that out to folks.
Thank you.
Other questions? Rob?
Sorry, with this reflection that they do, how is that evaluated? Does that go to peers and...
The reflection's actually going to be judged by the observers, by the building principal, because it's where we transition the peer review piece is when you have a part that is something that is based upon, it's actually evaluative information, so personnel information. That is a piece that we'll be working with the building principals to judge those reflection components. And so that's how it will be scored. It will be scored by their building principal in terms of the level of efficacy in working through the reflection.
Other questions? I have a couple. For the student piece, did you say at what grade level?
Yeah, right now the pilot survey is K-12. We have some we're nervous about K-2 because that's the place where we've had some feedback from some of the pilot districts that they are struggling, and that may be a piece where a replacement complete parent survey might be the strategy. However, there are many districts that are using are saying that there are, well, they have age appropriate surveys. In K2, they are all paper pencil. Once you get to third grade and up, they're typically online surveys. And of course, the struggle with kids in K2 is that they love everything, and usually they use the emoticon of a smiley face if I'm happy. Well, of course, most every K2 kid is going to fill in a little smiley face. So, but what we are working through is the fact that we've got some pretty large thinkers who are looking through this and how to gather feedback, even from kids as early as age 5 and 6. I personally struggle with that as a former primary building principal, but at the same time, it is a piece that we need to keep developing and learning what's going to be the best strategy for our primary folks to get that kind of feedback. Our intention to begin with is to pilot some of these pre-K, the K2, but even think about it more. Remember the fact that our pre-kindergarten teachers, our early childhood special education teachers are governed by this law. So we could be talking about children as early as age 3 who have a disability in terms of it. Maybe it's an issue with speech or those kinds of pieces where they may not even be able to communicate their engagement. There are some pieces that are left open here that we are going to be learning over the first year in terms of putting that together, because nobody else has figured that part out yet either. It's by far the part that is the hardest.
So, and that kind of goes into my second question. So you talked about this summative evaluation every 3 years. You were talking about the teachers themselves in terms of a summative evaluation every 3 years, right?
Yeah, every teacher will be required to have a summative evaluation every 3rd year.
So then, how about the plan itself? Because you're talking about piloting different pieces, and I mean, this sounds terrific, and as Julie said, it sounds really well aligned with what we have, but you're going to learn some things as you're doing it. How are you going to evaluate that, and how does that work? Because some teachers will be on this plan, and then you'll figure out something doesn't work. And
well, our goal is to stay within a narrow parameter to begin with, in terms of over the first year or so, understanding that we are going to have to make some changes as time goes on. If you think about the most difficult, I think most people would say the most difficult piece is that student engagement. That part of a person's evaluation is worth 15% of the overall evaluation, and it's based upon the reflection. And so we think that in terms of that band, we think that we have enough room to make some difference without necessarily impacting overall tremendously in terms of the summative rating that a person would get. And we will, as we said, we're not going to disband the committee. The committee will be looking at things as time goes on and making some determinations. And there will be some times where our goal is not to move the goalposts very often, but we know we're going to have to adjust them. And we're very curious to see how the state's part plays out next year, because you're taking the term teacher evaluation and applying it to everyone pre-K through young adult special education or 18 to 21-year-old program who are all governed under this. And yet, I'm not sure there's really a way to do one evaluation for everyone. What our goal is to come up with a framework, because even for our early childhood special ed teachers, the PLC goals apply. That's wonderful. Social workers are governed under this as well, because they're part of the bargaining unit. Psychologists, we have other evaluations for them that we've developed over the years, and our plan is to continue to use those because they are specific to their job, and that makes sense. What we're trying to use is the reasonable person theory, and look at, does it make sense to keep going with the evaluation that we've used for someone who's got a very specific piece like a school psychologist or a school social worker? The way we've determined is if you used to use the Danielson rubric, now you're going to use the Marsh rubric. If you used to use something else, you'll continue to use that, and then you'll add the PLC goals, because even all of our school psychologists are part of the PLC. They're going to be able to use that goal as part of their student achievement.
okay, thank you.
You bet.
Anything else? Thanks so much, Matt.
Thank you. And thank you for tolerating me trying the airplay tonight.
New technology.
We learned some things.
All right, our second item for discussion report is the anti-bullying bill and other pending
Yes.
legislation.
So now we go from the sublime to the not so sublime. Let's leave it at that. Obviously, we're in the unsession. Supposedly going to be the shortest session on record, starting in late February and being completed sometime around the end of April, which now seems to be fading very fast, that we're probably going to be out to the actual end of, actually mid-May deadline that's set in the Constitution. What I wanted to share with you tonight is just a couple of different pieces, and looking at a couple of things that have already been completed, and also kind of to give you the overview of where some of the other big rocks are that the legislature is trying to deal with. Probably the two things that have been the major completion pieces so far is that initially there was the tax bill, as you know, moved through very, very quickly. As part of the tax bill, there was a real concern about the fact that there was a chunk of districts that were between about 900 students and 2,000 students that didn't get the $424 of location equity revenue, didn't get the $212 of outstate regional location equity revenue, and weren't small enough to get small school revenue. And so the legislature, especially as the push came back to get a tax bill done and get it done immediately, the folks in the education area basically worked with the tax committee to insert language in that now gives every district in the state $424 of location equity revenue, which now is a new name, which is escaping me.
Local option revenue
now. And so basically we're going to see every district in the state get that dollar amount. And really, for all intents and purposes, what it's done is it's raised the base formula for everybody by $424, where before there was some very unequal impact of that raise. Now every district in the state is in that same place. That happened very, very quickly in response to trying to get the other tax cuts taken care of. This was inserted and put through. And I think in the end is the fairest way to go, because we would have initially argued that the location equity revenue for a few districts was not necessarily a fair move, and it would have been much better just to raise the base. Well, now for all intents and purposes, they've raised the base. The one thing that will be different now is where before with the location equity revenue, we did not have to do anything with that to get it included. We now have to formally approve moving to the $424 of, help me Matt again,
local option
revenue. So we'll be dealing with that as soon as we get some direct information from the state as to exactly how that has to happen. Would probably be in late summer, early fall. The second bill that came through was the Safe and Supportive Schools Act, which, as you know, the governor has already signed into law on April the 9th. And initially, I think a lot of us had some concerns about the law because of the language that was included. And there were some concerns in the language that had to do with the fact that the definition was very, very broad and very vague. We were concerned about the amount of training that had to occur. We were concerned about the amount of bureaucracy involved in gathering all of the data and then forwarding that data onto the state. We were very concerned about the fact that there would be this new state center that would have some oversight, and also that the commissioner would have not only oversight, but also the ability to withhold funding from school districts if she was questioning to what extent the Safe and Supportive Schools Act was being implemented in a particular district. The good news is that through the work of a lot of groups, and I work directly with MASA, Minnesota Association of School Administrators, also MSBA, also Schools for Equity in Education, we all basically spent a lot of time with the Senate, because the Senate really was the one that had to get a bill passed. Remember, the House actually passed the bill previously, but then couldn't get it through the legislature because it was coming at the 11th and a half hour last year. And so the modifications that were made really tightened up the definition. And the two core pieces of their tightening were actually the language that's in our current policy. That has to do with the idea that for it really to be bullying, there has to be a repeated pattern of inappropriate conduct. So it isn't just one time. And there has to be a perceived, and I want to stress, imbalance of power between the individual being bullied and the perpetrator. So in other words, if you have two students of exactly the same age and size and demeanor, it's not likely that there's an imbalance of power going on. If you have a situation where a student trips and falls down and believes another student has tripped them on the playground, and that happens once and has never happened before, and that doesn't happen again, that's probably not a bullying incident. Or even if a situation where students would get in a fight. Again, if it's not a repeated incident, then there are other disciplinary measures that can be used for that. We can deal with physical aggression, we can deal with verbal aggression, whatever. We have consequences to deal with it, but it's not an act of bullying. So they really have tightened up that part of the definition in terms of the perceived imbalance of power and also the fact that it has to be repeated. And the third piece, which really deals with situations that are outside of the school day, a cyberbullying situation, is this concept of it must have substantive impact on the student back at school. And I think we maybe have even talked about that here, the concept of nexus, where you have to be able to show that what happened outside of school comes back and has an impact on how the student is able to interact or work with others at school. And so those three pieces are in place, which we think makes the definition much more workable. There was also a piece that required yearly training, as well as not only training for all staff, but also training for every volunteer and everybody that ever came into your building. Even if it was the parent that came in once a year to read to their child's classroom. They have backed away from that. The training now is every 3 years after the first year. So you have the ability to have some time to get the training completed, and the volunteer training is tied to the same strategies that you have for how do you work with volunteers otherwise. So right now, obviously, like for our background checks for volunteers, we deal with a very different kind of a background check. If a parent is going to take a group on an overnight trip or to Eagle Bluff or whatever, then what we have, again, for that parent who comes in, and the only time they're in the room, they're under the direct eye and direct supervision of the teacher that's in that room. There also has been modifications in terms of having to pass the data from the school on to the state, which we really struggled with. And so now basically the data is maintained at school. And if you think about it, we've had Skyward in this district for a number of years. We collect all that disciplinary data. We report DERS data every year, Discipline Information Referral System data, to the state every year. There was really no need to create a whole nother level of function there. So that basically has been taken away. And it reinforces the concept of data privacy, because there was also some concerns in the original bill about the fact of having to share all the information with both the person or the parents of the individual being bullied and of the perpetrator. And I think administrators came back and said that isn't always the best strategy. We need to have some flexibility in how we do that. And again, the Senate, I think, did a good job of responding and making modifications. So while we know there's going to be additional cost in terms of the training, and there'll be some logistic issues in this first year in training, we do feel that we have a much more workable bill. I know there are some individuals that are still concerned that this may create a flurry of legal activity, but that's yet to be seen. And I would say, simply based on the fact that the bill now much more closely represents and reflects the current policy that we have, we see a much less of a significant impact than we would have if the original bill was in place. The good thing was then that when it came time to have the House deal with their bill, instead of going to conference committee and trying to fight out between the House bill, which was really unworkable, and the revised Senate bill, the House, after a number of hours of debate, basically chose to adopt the Senate bill. So we think we've got something that's much more workable than we would have had before, and I think reflects a lot of the current practice that we already use. So beyond the anti-bullying bill and the tax bill, there's a couple of other major pieces. One of them is called HITA, H-I-T-A, or the Health Insurance Transparency Act. Right now, there are two versions of that bill that are in place, and that will be going to conference committee after the Easter break. The key piece with this is really kind of the reincarnation or the redoing of the statewide health insurance bills that we've seen from Education Minnesota over the last number of years. And it really reflects now the concept of what they want to see as a more transparent process in terms of health insurance, which to them means requiring that PEEP, the public employees insurance plan, be required to respond to proposals from any district, and that they need to be one of the bidders, or at least to be a bid from PEEP needs to be sought in terms of the work. The other pieces that are really in the bill have to do with sealed bids and a certain number of sealed bids being required, and some timing in terms of how far ahead of that process that those particular pieces need to occur. We have shared some real concerns from Northfield and a number of other districts across the state that use self-insured plans, because we really don't bid in that way. We basically take a bid to get a third-party vendor who basically negotiates for us to get the best plan. And we've used that for the last several years. And in fact, we can't share that yet, can we? Okay, I won't share that. Anyway, we've had very good results over the last several years having that third-party vendor be the go-between between us and insurance companies. We really believe that it's almost going to be impossible to do what we're currently doing with self-insurance if we have to go through the bidding process as it's being described in this plan. So what you have now is you have a House bill that requires all districts to do it. You have a Senate bill that exempts self-insured districts from the involvement in this bill. And so the encouragement obviously for board members is as much as possible to share with both our House and Senate members the fact that we want the language that's in the Senate bill, because that basically exempts school districts like Northfield from this process, and again allows us to keep the low cost and basically the very limited levels of increases that we've seen over the last several years. So that gives you kind of a sense of that's kind of one big piece. The other big piece is that they actually have, obviously, the omnibus finance bills also have gone through both the House and the Senate. We have two different bills, and then we have what the governor wants. And to start with, the governor's proposal basically is to spend about $3.5 million. That's mainly simply to fund the reduced price lunch for those individuals on reduced price lunch. It really doesn't have a significant desire to do any additional funding for schools. The House basically came through with about $75 million in new funding, with the core component being about a $54 million increase in the basic formula, which is about $58 per pupil, or about 1%. Now remember, when we looked at this bill last year, we talked about the fact that the basic formula increase for each year was 1.5%. However, as you know, the inflationary rate is greater than 1.5%. So if we get no new money, basically, even though we're getting 3% over the 2-year period, we actually have a basic formula that has less buying power than it did 2 years ago. So our belief is that it's going to be very important to put money on the basic formula. And the other reason is that we believe that the basic formula raises all boats. So everybody's treated fairly in terms of the increase. The Senate's version is, compared to the $75 million in the House version, is only $41 million. And the focus is mainly on early childhood. So the majority of money that they're spending are providing additional money for early childhood, additional money for ECFE, and really no increase in terms of the basic formula. And then the one other thing that they've added is that districts like Northfield, who do not have QComp, there is a one-time $9 million amount that's being recommended that would be used to implement the teacher evaluation system across the state for all districts who don't currently have QComp. Biggest problem, again, as I see these two right now, is the fact that in one case you have funding that raises all boats and helps to address the shortfall in terms of just simply getting to the inflationary rate for doing business as a school district. The other one basically has some major winners and losers. Early childhood is a big winner, and nobody is arguing the importance of that. However, if we looked at how much of that early childhood funding that came in the last go-round that actually has gone to any place outside of the metro, it's very, very limited. Even though Northfield and a number of other districts are still rated as high-rated early childhood programming, we don't have the same ability as the districts in Hennepin County and other places to be able to actually access dollars from the state. And so, as we look at these two plans, our belief is that the best potential settlement would be that we'd see a proposal that would be closer to the House version than the Senate version. We'd like to see the money on the basic formula. We'd like to see reduced dollars on other pieces, and we'd like to see that focus be on trying to get us to a level of funding that would at least reflect the current inflationary rate. What we know is that when this comes down, there will be a small group from the House and a small group from the Senate will sit down with the governor, and they will fight it out to figure out what has to happen and to set the final targets. And so very likely we're going to see less than the House's version. We hope we don't see less than the Senate's version, which for all intents and purposes is no new money at all, other than some one-time money for the beginnings of the implementation of the teacher evaluation system. Right now, again, with about a $1.25 billion surplus, most of that money has gone to buying down new taxes that were originally implemented in last year's appropriation year. And I guess our belief is that there is some reason for us to really begin to come back and focus on that base formula. So wanted you to be aware of kind of where that is, and if you have an opportunity to talk to House or Senate folks, that would be the focus I would share with them, is we really need to look at ways to move closer to the House's version, because that's the one that does give us additional dollars, and it really does positively impact every school district in the state because it raises dollars on the basic formula. It does really thin down other pieces that get funded at this time, but if the money that's being provided is going to be at a low level, then the best place to put the money is where it will positively impact every school district. because we've already had a piece that's helped to balance every school district with the 424 roll-in piece. So really, this is the other place where we could really have a benefits for schools. Beyond that, we know there are policy bills in both houses. The Senate, for a while, didn't look like they were going to have a policy bill, but now they seem like they will have a policy bill. We honestly don't know if there will be any policy bill get approved. We know there will be a finance bill that gets approved. So, in my mind, that's the piece I think we want to focus on at this point. So that's really the three pieces. Anti-bullying bill, a much stronger, much more workable bill than we had previously, and one where I would applaud the Senate for listening to people that are in the field actually needing to do this work, building principals, superintendents, and others, and building a much more workable, safe schools bill. The tax bill, which I think is good because it did help support those districts that otherwise were in the donut hole of school districts in terms of not getting funding. The HITA bill, which we see real problems with, especially because of the ability to make it work if you're a self-insured district. And then the final finance omnibus bill, where we really believe the House version is the best version moving forward. And knowing again that there will have to be some resolution between the House, the Senate, and the Governor's office before anything moves forward on that piece. So I would stand for any questions you might have.
Questions?
See, Matt? Just no questions at all, right?
I have-
That's good, because you wear them down, and then I don't have to answer questions. Yes, ma'am.
I have just one.
Yes.
So on the HITA, the Health Insurance
Yes.
Transparency Act, in terms of language that we would want to use in terms, I understand that we prefer the Senate bill because of our self-insurance, but are there particular, is there a particular set of language that maybe you could share with us?
Well, it's just, and this was, I believe, the Bonhoeff amendment, which was added to the Senate bill.
Okay.
And that's the one we'd like to see remain in the final compromise in conference committee, because that simply just excludes self-insured districts, which again, it's because everybody I've talked to, from MSBA to MASA to others, are saying they don't see any way in the world to implement it when you aren't going out for bids in the same way that a district that's just simply going out and asking different insurance companies to bid. We're actually have been in a much more favorable position of being able to negotiate with multiple companies using a third-party vendor to do that piece. And it's been a good situation because it really has reduced our increases.
And I think it's important to clarify, we go through a process every year in terms of working with the marketplace, especially since we broke away from using the co-op's insurance a couple of years ago. And so don't want people to think that we don't go out and get bids. In fact, we go out and get several. We even sometimes have multiple from the same carrier through different partners that they have. And so I think today we looked at 4 or 5 different quotations essentially from different companies. So it's, to be clear, we go out every year to look at that. It's just a matter of the way that we do it is different than what is being required in the bill of the state.
And part of the discussion really here in terms of the initial transparency argument was that you know, there wasn't necessarily the transparency with the various bargaining units in terms of information. Well, we have a insurance advisory committee that includes members from every single bargaining unit in the district, as well as administrators and district office folks. And so we are about as transparent as we can be in terms of making sure that everybody that's going to be impacted by that insurance has a place at the table. So again, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The other thing we don't really believe is that PEEP, because they have to have the ability to bid, PEEP really is not even capable of providing the administrative services to a self-insured district. So how we could even plug in the idea of having them be one of the bidders for the third-party administration when they don't really have the personnel or the staffing to be able to make that particular part happen. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. We are ready to move on to our first item for individual action, which is the District Youth Council proposal, which was presented to the board at the last meeting on March 10th.
I believe we have some folks here this evening that are ready to stand for any questions that you might have. They provided you with a revised, updated version of their proposal to you. I don't know if you guys want to take just a few minutes to kind of share, again, reminding them of the plan and the adjustments you've made, and then open it up so that board members may ask any additional questions that they might have.
Sure. So as you recall from last time, the purpose of this proposal is to create a district youth council which could step in and replace the role that the Mayor's Youth Council was playing in the past few years as the Mayor's Youth Council transitions into a role where it's focused much more on city issues. The couple of changes that we made within the proposal centered around what students were eligible to apply, and so we added a provision so that students from the ALC would be able to apply to these positions, as well as eliminating the provision for Arcadia students. After speaking with some folks at Arcadia, we thought it would be better if we consulted with their student council when relevant, rather than trying to have an Arcadia student on the board. But those were the two major shifts. I think I may have changed the language in one or two other places, but just to clarify things, so the actual meaning didn't change at all.
Okay. Board members, this is an item for individual action, so we typically have a motion on the table before we have questions. Move to approve the motion by Noel. Second. Seconded by Ann. Questions for the youth? Julie?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to thank you guys for this work. I mean, this is really, I think when last year as a board we discussed possibly adding a representative on the board as a student, the conversation really centered around, how best to really get authentic student input. And I don't think any of us maybe had a vision like what's coming together now, but this is kind of what we all sort of came together to say we really want that. And so this is, I think, going to be a really wonderful vehicle for us for getting that. So I thank you guys for your work, and just wanted to mention that I happen to be at the middle school on Friday, helping student council sell bubblegum for cancer. And so a number of the council, the Mayor's Youth Council and Rally were there, and they were going to individual tables at the middle school and talking to kids about peer pressure and anxieties of middle school. It was so wonderful to see you guys there, and it was really great to see the middle school kids. They really look up to you guys, and so it was wonderful for me to see that in action and to realize that we'll be able to now do more of those kinds of things and really get the feedback that you guys will get. We'll be able to hear in a more formal way. So I just want to thank you guys for your work. I think it's you really did a very excellent job with the presentation and putting together the concept of this council.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Anything else? No?
I agree with what Julie said. She spoke very well, and my thoughts too are very appreciative of your work. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. We have a motion and a second on the table here to support the District Youth Council proposal. All those in favor of approving it, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Super. Thank you.
Thanks for all your work. All right. I will remind board members that we had a second item for individual action that was added to the table file. So now we are on to the approval of the capital facilities bond bid and the information you received in your table file. Dr. Richardson, do you or Matt want to?
I was going to say, what we really need to share with you tonight are really two different pieces. The initial piece is for Heather from PFM, who will be sharing with us the information about the competitive sale that occurred today and what that's allowed us to do in terms of the amount of dollars that we're raising and the interest rate that we're going to be receiving on those. And then we will look at in the consent agenda the information about what impact that's going to have on our ability to provide additional completion of a roofing project that we originally thought we would have to do in a different way because the cost was too high. So, Heather, it's all yours. This is Heather Casperson from PFM.
Hello, good evening, Superintendent Richardson.
I'm sorry, could you speak up a little bit?
Sure. Thank you for having me here. You may remember at your meeting back in February 10th, you were asked to pass a resolution about your intent for these projects and how to finance them. So what we did today, as Superintendent Richardson was saying, is we went out for competitive bids for a $1,525,000 general obligation capital facilities bond issue. We took bids competitively, and you received 8 bids, which is a very high amount of bids. It surpassed the expectations that I had. And hopefully you have a letter in front of you that lists out what those bids were. You will see a list of Robert W. Baird and Company was the low bidder. The true interest rate of their bid is 1.82%, which is phenomenally low. This is a 10-year issue. The highest bid was a 1.99, so a difference of less than 2 basis points. So that really, the number of bids that you received and how tight the spread was really indicates what a wonderful, wonderful low-cost financing you have today. The other thing I would like to mention is that in going for this bond issue, some of the staff had conversations with representatives from Standard & Poor's to get a credit rating for not only the school district, but you applied to be in the school district credit enhancement program. And I would like to congratulate you that your rating was affirmed as AA+. AA+ is one step down from AAA. AAA is the highest rating. So you have a very high credit rating. So I just want to commend you for that, because it is the policies that you put in place, and it is the staff that you have and the way that you operate this school district that is why you were evaluated so highly. So please take a moment and really let that soak in, because that is wonderful. So with that said, we do have these bids for you today, and what we are asking you to do is we do need to have another roll call motion, and we need somebody to introduce a resolution, and I'm just going to read it here so we have it correctly. I don't know if you have this in front of you, but what we need is we need somebody to introduce and move for adoption a resolution awarding the sale, determining the form and details, authorizing the execution, delivery, and registration, and providing for the payment of $1,525,000 general obligation capital facilities bond series 2014A. That's kind of a mouthful, so however you would like to handle that.
But it's not the first time you've had a motion very, very similar to this that we've done. We've done this type of bonding.
Yes, absolutely. So if there are any questions, I would gladly entertain them now, but I would really just like to let you know that this is a fantastic bid. And one of the other things Superintendent Richardson was alluding to, the interest rate environment that we are in right now, the yields are very low, and what is very appealing for investors is to have a higher coupon structure. So essentially, investors will pay for the privilege to have a higher coupon when the yields are as low as they are. So how that benefited the district today is that the winning bidder provided a premium to purchase your bond. So if you look through the details, you've got a lot of information here, but the details are that the purchase price is higher than your $1,525,000. So you are getting extra money, and that is why you are going to be able to do a project that you did not think that you would be able to finance, because you did end up getting not only a little bit more money, but at a very low interest rate. So I hope that made sense.
So board members, because this is an item for individual action, before we have questions, should we have a motion and a second? And as Heather alluded, we have the resolution in front of us for the motion with the language. There's someone. Oh, sorry, from your table file, right. So, sorry, board members, if you want to look at the table file, they'll see the resolution.
Well, I will move the resolution.
Okay, moved by Carrie, seconded by Robin. You're not finding
I don't think we actually have the paper.
So it's under the, it says superintendent's recommendation, but it's actually a
Yep, got
I
it.
think it should be a resolution.
Yep, thank you.
But
I
it's
was
the same,
expecting
it's the
a
exact
separate
same
piece of
language
paper.
that Heather read, so.
Yep, thank you.
Does everyone find that? So it's in your table files. Number 2, approval of capital facilities bonds, and then if you look under what superintendent's recommendation. Okay. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Questions? John?
In looking through the package here, as you said, there's a lot of information, but can you explain for us the sort of details here? The price is $1.584 million, which means they're paying some $60,000 more than our the amount that we're paying back, and then there's also a number underneath that says NIC, and if you could explain for us what that is, please.
Sure, absolutely. You are correct that the dollar premium is $67,786.60. We do need to allow for some underwriter compensation with that, but that is the amount of the premium that was with the bid. And the NIC stands for net interest cost in dollars. So that is just a summation of how bids are evaluated, looking at both the percentage, what we call true interest cost in dollars. It's a little bit confusing, which is, let's see, the one below that is the TIC, which is listed as 1.8206. So that is when you take the present value of the interest payments and you present value it back to today with the premium. That is how you come up with the true interest rate as a percent. And then the net interest cost in dollars is just another computation to evaluate how much you are spending for the financing.
And NIC really is net interest
Cost.
cost, correct?
Yes, sir.
And TIC would be true interest.
It's true interest cost, but we also refer to it as true interest rate because it is the rate.
Because it's a rate.
Yes,
correct.
sir.
And if I'm understanding the numbers here, like for instance, the 2016 bond, it says pays a rate of 2%, but it has a yield of 0.45%. So really, the person, whoever is buying those bonds is paying us 1.5% up front, and we're paying back 2%. Is
Right,
that how that works?
Very close. It is when you actually there are some schedules that you do not have in front of you that lay this out year by year. But for, as you say, 2016 with you have 145,000 is your principal amount. The coupon is 2% and the yield is 0.45%. So the investor pays a price of 102%, 0.647. They pay you 100, or not you, but they're paying 102% to get that 2% coupon, is how that works.
Okay. I don't think my grandfather would recommend.
Well, it is kind of unique, and we've only seen this a couple of different times, I think, as we've worked with different vendors over the last decade, and I know in the last 30-some years I've been a superintendent, where you actually had a situation where a bidder would actually pay more than the face value of the bond. But again, the concept here is in order to get the rates that they would like to have for people who are holding them for different levels or years, they're willing to pay additional dollars. The real advantage again for us is the fact that that savings in terms of, or that amount that they're paying that's the premium above and beyond the 1.525 million we can then use to actually fund the majority of the project that we would not have been able to fund without having those additional dollars.
If I can go back and see if I've got this now. So that for example, for that bond, the investor is paying us 102%. We're paying them 2% a year. So if we're paying them back in 2 years, we're paying them roughly 104%, or not, maybe not quite, back. So they're really getting a 2% return over those 2 years, or roughly. Is that roughly how it works? I know that the math is more complicated than that, but.
I think it's safe to say that it's a 2%. It wouldn't be a 4%. It's just 2% 2 times, so to speak.
Right.
Right.
So they're getting back 2% interest for the first year, plus some principal, and 2% interest for the second year, plus some principal. So it's probably somewhere between 102 and 100. It's probably less than 104%. So that's how it works after that 0.45% yield. That they're getting really 0.9% interest back over this, or is it 0.45 over 2 years? Is that how it works?
They're getting interest only in the first year, so
Okay. And it would be 2%. So really, in the first year, they're getting their 2% back, and then the next year it's the principal plus 2% again.
Since the price is 102.64, I don't think they're quite even getting back what they're giving to hold the investment.
Wow, they invest like I do.
I think the real good news out of this is the fact that because of the work that people like Val and Stephanie and Tom Stringer and Dr. Richardson over the years, is that to be AA+ is a really outstanding place to be. And when you have that kind of rating, people want your business because they know it's safe. And we think that that's the real good news out of this, plus the fact that when we got the call this morning saying you're going to get more money to be able to spend than what we originally thought, it was great because the project that we get to add is the roof that's above the girls' locker room here at Northfield High School. Now that doesn't sound very exciting, but it's a roof that we've had a lot of problems with over the last few years, and it was something that unfortunately we were going to have to push off until next year. So again, the good fiscal management that's been done by many people over the last decade allowed us to do a additional project that is going to be very useful to the district, but it was something we would have had to put off. And so that's how it manifests itself into what will you see happen here. You're going to see another roof that's going to get fixed, and another example of the district stewardship paying off. So that's, to me, is the elevator speech about what is the good news about this.
Yes. Well, and it's the idea would be if we didn't have the kind of credit rating we have, and we hadn't nurtured that credit rating over the years, we would not see, number one, the number of bids, nor would we see the low interest rates that we're able to get on these bonds. You'd have one or the other would go up. Either you'd have few bidders wanting to bid because they were unsure about your ability to pay the money back, or they would want to extract a much higher level of interest because they, again, were not comfortable that you would be a secure place to put their money over the course of up to 10 years. Okay.
Great. So yes, thank you to district staff, even if it's a little confusing to us. It's a good confusing. Thank you for all your stewardship and having that rating is fantastic. So we have a motion and a second on the table, and this is a roll call vote.
Correct. Strabone?
Aye.
Hardy?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Pritchard?
Aye.
Maple?
Aye.
Clausen?
Aye.
And Iverson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Heather.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Board members, we are ready to move on to the consent grouping, and I'll remind you that we have a few items that were added in the table files, including the revised recommendation on the capital roofing bids, so that's slightly different than what you had seen. Is there anything anyone wishes to pull from the consent grouping? I'll give you a minute to look. Is there anything anyone wants to say? All right, is there a motion to approve the consent grouping?
So moved.
Moved by Julie,
Second?
seconded by Ann. All those in favor of approving the consent grouping say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Consent grouping is approved. All right, we have 2 items for individual action, or items for information. The Spring Parent Teacher Conference participation numbers, and April 2014, and I'll remind board members there was a slightly revised enrollment report.
Yes. We added 300 kids, which is a good thing. I think in terms of Spring Parent Teacher Conferences, we talked last time about the impact that we've seen over the last several years of moving the middle school conferences, the second conference of the year, from a traditional conference to a student-led conference. What you see this year is the final impact of having the 8th grade conferences also now be student-led, as well as the 6th and 7th grade. If you remember, it wasn't that many years ago when we were running a traditional conference in this second term, we were getting numbers that looked more like the high school in the 30 to 40% range. And you see this current year, we have 99, 98, and 99% in terms of the Spring Parent Teacher Conferences. So it has been, I think, a very, very positive change in terms of bringing that together. Plus, it's put us on track for looking at World's Best Workforce in terms of really giving an opportunity for students to come to the high school, get a chance to wander around the building, get a chance to meet with other students to talk about what high school will be like, get a chance to meet with a variety of different teachers, and to have their parents also have a chance to meet with high school staff and to learn about the high school. So we think it was a very positive piece, and I think that will go forward in that particular format. So again, that would be the information on the parent-teacher conferences. Enrollment report, I would tell you that now that we have the third grade and it isn't the 3rd grade, but the 6th grade included in the middle school numbers, that you notice that the numbers again are tracking as they would normally have tracked over the course of time, and that our numbers again are very much on par with where they were at the beginning of the year, where they've been off and on for at least a decade. So all good.
All right. Future meetings, April 28th and May 12th, and it'll be a busy May, so that I would ask for a motion for adjournment. Moved by Noel, seconded by Carrie. All those in favor of adjourning the meeting say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.